So in the first three talks and meditations, I covered the essential principles, which are about being present. And if you become present, the next movement is a kind of softening, as we realize we've been sort of holding our breath in whatever drama we've been in. And that if we stay with that softness, with that flow, then at some point we kind of drop, into the truth of who we are, or our heart. And from that place, we're going to see something different. We're going to perceive something different, and the action which arises out of us is going to be different from if we hadn't taken that journey. So, in other words, if I hadn't taken that journey, I'd be in some kind of reaction, which means I will do or say X. Having taken that journey of the principles, just taking a moment, then, if you like, instead of reaction commanding what I say or do, it is a sense of heart. And so from there, I'm going to be more kind to myself, and I'm almost certainly going to be more kind to the person that I'm with. And so today I want to lead you in a meditation which is taking the journey of the principles. And in Tai Chi, they talk about building your Kung Fu. Meaning, you're building your muscle of something, you're building your knowing of something. And that, so for example, if your Kung Fu of being present is this big, and what you're in front of, is this big, then you're just going to freak out as usual. So fast forward a year or two, or whatever it is, and your Kung Fu of, let's say, being present, becoming present, being grounded, has grown. And so, 2 years on, you meet that same thing which disturbed you, which plunged you into reaction, which caused you to lose yourself. And the Kung Fu is equal to it. The knowing of the principle is equal to it. And so in that moment, you can do something different. You can allow the softening, you can allow the heart. And so what happens is that when we encounter this kind of situation, and we freak out and we go into reaction, we have a judgment about that. We say to ourselves, well, you know the principles. So you've spent time training in TMW, or you spent time on the mat, or you spent time moving in TMW, growing, and look, it's nothing's changed. And so then we get judgmental, and maybe give up the path because it's not working. But what we fail to realize is this. And so how can this meet this? It can't. It's not going to. And if anything, that judgment, that sort of self-recrimination, it actually doesn't happen this way, but it could reduce it. And so, this is one of the first things I just want to point out, that it's at this point, if we just don't judge ourselves, if we just understand that it is just the dynamic, that we're not there enough yet, and that what our path is about growing the Kung Fu of the principles, then what you'll find is the ability to kind of forgive yourself, the ability to cut yourself some slack, the ability to give yourself a bit more room to breathe with the process. And so actually what's more important is to see in your life where you are present. Now, how do you grow the Kung Fu of present? You grow the Kung Fu of presence by tasting it. You don't grow the Kung Fu of presence by not tasting it. You grow the Kung Fu of presence, you grow the Kung Fu of the principles by giving yourself permission to touch them and let them touch you. So it's much more important because what we do is we think, oh well, I'm going to, I'm going to, these principles are great, and we immediately put them to the biggest, baddest thing in our life. And again, that's what we're doing. But really what we want to do is to look at the smaller aspects of life. So for me, I used to practice a lot in supermarkets. I love supermarkets. I love going to supermarkets. Practicing being present as I'm walking around the supermarket. Practicing being present as I have to choose, this over that, instead of either just doing it in a reactive way or getting kind of stressed about it. And, on a really good day, as the third principle of heart is present, it's like giving Richard the present of that apple, which is just a little bit better. It's just a little bit shiny. It just kind of attracts me, and I'm kind of there, and I go, "Ooh, yeah, that apple. Now, I'm going to give that to Richard." So, like from heart, as it were. And as I go through that process in the supermarket, as I go through that process of walking down the street, as I go through that process of sitting and meditation, growing my kung fu, as I go through that process of moving my body in the movements of TMW with the principles, I'm growing my muscle. And again, if you just give yourself a little bit of time, you'll start to see that what you reacted to, maybe last week or last month or last year, this month, this year, something is slightly different, and that's because of the growing the kung fu. So that's the first thing that I want to really emphasize for you today is practice. And practice, if I think about practice, then I can have to drag myself, into the room, screaming, as it were. But if I think of it more as an opportunity to let the principles touch me. And for example, in the TMW sequence, we have these 3 phases, which are designed to just simply and gently lead you through the process of the principles. Principles becoming present, the principles of softening and flow, and the principles of giving yourself back your space. And so it's in the design of the movement. And if I look at practice from a have to, then I have to kind of persuade myself it's good for me. And sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. But if I see it as an opportunity, not to get it right or to go through, or, give myself the discipline of practice, but to allow myself to be touched, then it's actually quite a different, as I see it as a personal invitation to presence, a personal invitation to explore, to be touched, by the grace of a movement, and to allow that movement, as it were, to be this morning's prayer. And you might say, it occurs to me as I'm saying this to you, that when I'm sitting here doing this right now, if I was doing it for you, that would be one thing, but I'm actually not. I'm using this as an opportunity to let the principles touch me. I am very present in this process. I'm listening to what is emerging. I'm allowing what is there to, excuse me. I'm allowing, one moment. I'm allowing the cough to emerge, for example. As I'm here, I'm allowing what is in there to arise. And that I'm in relationship. I'm in a relationship with myself. And I'm in relationship with you, even though I can't see you. All I can see is like a camcorder. And if I if I look at the camcorder and try and talk to that, then this isn't going to go anywhere. But if, on the other hand, I just come into relationship. Now that's my doorway. That's my doorway to you. It's also the doorway to me. So I'm looking, from presence. I'm looking from flow, and I'm looking from the heart of me, and that is allowing me to simply allow this kind of knowing, to flow. So building the kung fu is a really important understanding, and understanding that in order to build kung fu, we need to practice. I want to just talk about something different again now, and some of you will have come on the day when I introduce what I call the Mandala of Being, which is a kind of like a diagram which allows us to see how we get thrown out, by the stories, that we tell ourselves. And so it's really, really helpful to see it as a kind of display, and I can't do that right now. But let me see if I can just talk briefly about it. So the Mandala of Being is made up of two paths. One is a kind of vertical path, you could call it, pathway, and the other is a horizontal pathway. Let's take the vertical pathway. So the vertical pathway has at its top the future, and at its bottom it has the past. And in the middle is the moment of now. And so, those who know say, the process of forgetting ourselves is very, very complex. So I think it's good to keep it simple. And the Mandala of Being is a really good way of keeping the understanding simple. So what they say is there are basically two ways that we forget ourselves. And one of them is in this first pathway, the pathway of time. And to simply be aware, of how much of the day are you truly in now? And how much of your time are you in the future or in the past? So sometimes especially if I've got an audience that I can see live, as it were, I play this game with them, which is to say, okay, so look, I'm going to change reality now. And in this new reality, wherever your mind goes, your body is just going to zip out of the room. So if you kind of remember that somehow at home you left the light switch on, your body would leave this room and it would go home. And I could see that. I would see you leave. And then when you've dealt with it, worked it out, I'll see you come back. And in the meantime, you weren't listening to me. You weren't here. I mean, in reality, as it were, your body is here, but I can see people zipping in and out of the room, as they leave the present moment. It used to be very disconcerting. Now I just see it as part of the process. So to be in the moment means that you stay right here. And you can stay right here with your ears. You can stay right here with your body. And just be aware, if you want to grow the Kung Fu of presence, be aware of when somehow you stop listening. Somehow you stop seeing. It's like when we listen to a recording of this, we hear different things. Why? Well, sometimes because actually we weren't there when it was said the first time. It was like, oh, I didn't hear that. How did that happen? Well, it happened because we weren't present. That we'd left, we'd gone off into the future, wondering what I'm going to do after this meeting, or what I've just left before this meeting. So you can see it as a continuum of time. And all of nature, as I said in the first talk, is actually in the moment. All of this body is in the moment. The only thing that isn't in the moment is this tiny little piece of my mind that's going, and what about that? And what about that? And what about that? And what about that? And that's when I get caught in my internal story about something. So I've talked about that before. I don't really need to say too much about that. And so the second pathway of forgetting is in the objectification of, on one end of the spectrum, of self, and on the other end of the spectrum of other. So, when am I just an occupation, for example? When do I objectify myself? You could think about it as like when you put on the uniform of mother or father, or you put on the uniform of older brother or younger brother, or older sister, younger sister. When you put on the uniform of your occupation, and you buy the uniform, you get lost in the uniform. You could think about it that way. You get lost in the uniform of the outrage of what's just happened to you, and what you lose is who's inside the uniform. You could think about it that way. But equally with the objectification of other. So when you put somebody else in a uniform, in the uniform of my wife, or my husband, or my girlfriend, or my boyfriend, or my relative, it's not a human being, it's my relative. When we make somebody a thing, we lose the reality of who they are. And it's the reality of who I am and the reality of who they are, which is where the magic is. And where the continuous cycle of recrimination happens is when I, as the one who is wounded, looks at you, who's the one who wounded me. And first of all, I don't see myself, and I don't see you either. We are locked in that relationship of the past, let's say. So I remember what happened in the past. When I look at you, you are the person that did that. And you're going to do that in the future to me again. So I'm going to defend myself. I'm going to wall myself off. I'm going to isolate myself. I'm going to punish you. I'm going to do, whatever it happens to be. And what we do is that we just circle. We circle around these 4 points: future, the past, objectification of self, objectification of other. And we are not in the moment. We are lost in the story. We are lost in the drama. We're lost, in and then, and what if, and I should have, and they should have, and okay. So if you can see that as an imagery, so for example, you're walking down the street. Are you walking down the street in the future, in your head? No, or are you walking down the street in the center of that pathway? Or if you are in relationship to yourself, let's say if there's an emotion of anger, or an emotion of fear, or an emotion of insecurity, are you just simply all of that insecurity? In other words, you've lost yourself into insecurity. Or are you the one that is, as it were, holding the insecurity that is in you? And that's very different. So as soon as I realize, I'm just talking about practicing growing the Kung Fu. Now, as soon as I realize, if I want to practice the Kung Fu, well, we have our formal practice in TMW. We have our formal practice in meditation. But what about the rest of life? So that's really where you can save a lot of time. That's where you can really get into the gym, as it were, of growing the muscle of the principles. So as you're walking down the street, are you walking in the present moment? Or are you thinking about the past or thinking about the future? And if you can do that, or as you see that you leave and you go ahead of yourself because you're thinking about what you're going to do when you get to finally where you're going, but you've actually left here. As soon as you can see that, you just keep that very simple idea of the path there, and you come back. And every time you come back, you grow the muscle. It's that simple. Every time you come back. Now, every time when you come back, you release the tension of efforting into the future. Every time you start to soften, you grow the muscle of the second principle. And every time when you're back, and you take a kind of in-breath, you go, oh well, here we are. In other words, we kind of come back into ourselves. We come back in, I'm going to make myself a cup of tea. That's like the third principle. We kind of come back into the truth of who we are. And that is growing the muscle. And that same moment, that moment of, oh well, I release the objectification of myself. And I release the objectification of the other. Kind of soften, I surrender, I come back to myself. And I notice, I notice the light shining on the leaf or on the door. I notice how I'm feeling. And I notice what I need. And let's say if it's a cup of tea, I'm actually hearted enough to make the cup of tea. I mean, how often do you think, oh, I'd love a glass of water, but and you haven't got enough heart to actually take 10 seconds to fill the glass of water. Somehow you're caught in the mandala of the story that you're in, whatever that story is. I don't have enough time. What? You don't have enough time? 10 seconds? You don't have 10 seconds to get a glass of water? No. When we see the reality of it, when we're in the heart, get a glass of water. And I feel better. And what's more, I'm growing the muscle of the principles. And what that means is that in these small increments, so see where it is, and see where it isn't in the small places, so that you can return. This is the secret. I'll say it again. See where the principles are and enjoy them. That's one part of the secret. The second part of the secret is to see where you lose the principles, where you step off into the past or the future or into the uniform, but not so totally, it's not such a big deal that you can return. And in returning, you grow the principles. So you grow the principles by enjoying, by letting them touch you, and you grow the principles by returning. That's the secret. And so as this muscle of the principles grow in you, as this knowing, as this reservoir of knowing grows in you, the bigger that is, the more you will be able to meet life's challenges. And this is absolutely true. I can guarantee you this is true. Why? Because I know it. That in time, you will get to those really big issues in life. And I'm not saying that you can do it all. I think in time, yes, one can do it all. But you can start to approach in that same way, in that soft limit way, you approach the big things in life, and you're able to allow the principles to be with you as you go. And if you can't, forgive yourself as soon as possible, and here we are again. But sooner or later, you're going to be able to embrace. You're going to be able to embrace the unbraceable. Sooner or later, you're going to be able to understand the ununderstandable. Sooner or later, you're going to be able to stay with something rather than get spun out. And that's when we really start to live life. And so you've heard us talk about the aim of the path is not to survive life, but to live life. To allow yourself to live your life, not just survive it. So at the end of the day, did you survive it? You kind of got through it. Or at the end of the day, and you may still be tired, but did you live that day? Because that day isn't coming back. It's gone. And so here we are again, and here we are again, and here we are again. So I think that's about enough for this morning. So again, just to simply review, what I'm pointing out to you is the understanding of growing the muscle. What I'm pointing out to you is how to grow the muscle. And what I'm pointing out to you is how to practice growing the muscle outside of your formal practice. And what I want to offer you now is a principle, if you like, a principle meditation. Starting with the first principle, going to the second principle, coming to the third principle. And in my world, there are 4 principles, and although the fourth one isn't really a principle, it's actually an effect of allowing the first 3, those 3 principles to touch you. And that fourth movement is that in that fourth movement, what comes out of me is going to be more in tune. It's going to be more in tune with my heart. It's going to be more in tune with my truth. It's going to be more in tune and more harmonious with life. From the Taoist point of view, that fourth movement, I'm closer to the Tao, or I'm closer to the divine, or I'm closer to mystery, or I'm closer to my true nature. My true nature can be expressed in that fourth movement. I love the story of one of my old students, Luc Shepard, was leaning against the wall, and this car drove up. All the windows are closed, and there were 4 builders in there, and they were having their lunch. I think it was fish and chips or something. So when you're in a car and you've got hot food in paper, and all the windows got kind of steamed up, and Luke was just kind of looking at this scenario, not really paying too much attention. They came right opposite him, so he couldn't miss it. And he's probably remembering the times when he'd done something similar. And it was actually a lovely day, and he was feeling in a good place. He was kind of naturally in that fourth place, if you like. And he was also a very good Tai Chi student of mine, and was almost certainly had been engaging in the principles, growing his kung fu. Anyway, there he was. It was a lovely day, and he was kind of just touched by these 4 guys. Probably they'd just come off a building site, and they were all chatting and eating and having a rest. When the window came down, and out of the window came the leftovers of the food. The fish and chips is traditionally in the newspaper, so they'd obviously just crumpled up the newspaper and chucked it out the window, and then rolled the windows up. And Luke was stunned. It's like, because this was outside his house, but he didn't react. And what he did was, he just knocked on the window, and he said, I believe this is yours. Would you like to take it away? And they all went, all right then. And job done. But you also know that could have ended very differently. In other words, if he hadn't been in the principles, if he hadn't been in that good place, and had come at them with, how dare you, come at them, what do you think you're doing? Come at them with some kind of judgment, that would have elicited a very different response. But because he was coming from innocence, because he was coming from a kind of delight, because he was showing something self-evident in a very simple way. They could receive it because they weren't losing face, they weren't being judged, they weren't being challenged. They were kind of being invited, and that's just a very simple exploration of how the principles can just sort of allow you to flow in a situation that otherwise would have caused a lot of problem. Okay. So enough talking. So if you just need to pop out briefly, and now would be a good time, or adjust yourself or take a little stretch, and because we're going to take a journey with the principles, and it would be, you might think of it as like it is a meditation, but you could think about it as a moment on the mandala when all of a sudden you realize that you've been spun out. What do you do? So this would be, how do you get back to the moment of now? How do you undress the uniform and come back to yourself? That's what this exploration is going to be about.